Behind the Fiction, the book lovers podcast, where we deliver interviews, insights, and ideas to passionate book lovers who want to stay in the stories they love. I'm Alexa Larberg, and this is episode 24 for October 17th, 2019. And today's guests are Erick Black and Greg Tremblay. Today's episode is all things audiobook, Opus X audiobook, to be exact. Greg and Erick are the producer and the narrator for the Opus X audiobook. Guys, all of them, all of the audiobooks, they're the people. This is awesome. You don't want to miss it. We learn about what it's like to be a narrator for audiobooks. Greg even has a studio inside of his house. Who would have known? Not me. Super interesting. But we also learn what it looks like from the files to go from raw files to produced files, how they manage a tight schedule for production, and all things audiobook. Really interesting. You don't want to miss this show. Make sure you don't miss this show or any other show by subscribing to both our podcast and our YouTube channel. Now, let's get to the show.
Welcome back to Behind the Fiction. My name's Stephen Campbell, and I'm here with Erick Black and Greg Tremblay, the production and narrator team for the Opus X series that's coming out. The first book is launching on November 1st. And Erick is the lead audio engineer for Dreamscape Media. He's also the producer of the Opus X audiobooks. Erick is the narrator. And
Greg's
so Greg is the narrator. So let's start out with you, Erick. Can you sort of explain what the process is for selecting the talent for a given project?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I first receive a copy of the book, I'm sitting down and trying to read as much of it as possible. Usually at a minimum is 10%. Rarely would I get to read the entire thing, almost never, just because of time constraints. But usually I find that about 10% is a good gauge to kind of figure out what's going on, who the characters are. There's some online tools as well. Goodreads or even just a basic Amazon description often will give us a lot of great clues. And then some keyword searches that kind of further dive in and catch anything we lost, any crazy, main character has a Jamaican accent is revealed on the last page or something like that.
You laugh.
So yeah, there's sort of spending a little while with it, and then from there going to the pool of narrators that we've both worked with or want to work with, or sometimes even digging even deeper and trying to find people maybe that have had success in the genre, or with even sometimes with the same author, we might be able to find other books they've done.
How far in advance how much time do you normally have to select the talent and hit production goals?
Yeah, so I love to have at least a few months to lock that in, but in reality, especially for Dreamscape, a lot of what we are acquiring are things that maybe the publisher held on to for a while and then decided they weren't going to be able to produce the audiobook. So some of our best content comes to us with a very short window. So I'm asking a lot of favors of narrators often, or just, can you squeeze in a 10-hour book, in the next 3 weeks? But yeah, like 3 months is usually where we end up with most of the stuff.
Okay, and Greg, from your standpoint, I mean, we've talked a little bit with Erick about what the process is like for him to select a talent. What's it like for you on your end to receive the communication from the producer? How do you submit auditions? Is there some other process that you go through?
Sure. Yeah, we often will get a note from the producers or the reps when they have a new project up that's frequently going to ask us to do a short audition. They'll usually narrow things down to maybe 5 of us that they know would be a good fit. They'll get a short piece from us, maybe 3 to 5 minutes, not so much that you have to wade through. And then that will go off either to them for their choice, or sometimes, there'll be author approval or the agent's approval. Sometimes we actually are either the author or the publisher's agent know that they want us for a particular project or someone's requested us. And then it's usually just a matter of discussing, what the lead times look like and how the deliveries are going to go for that.
So you mentioned lead times and deliveries, and that all gets back to schedules. How
Sure.
far in advance are you typically scheduling?
I usually book out at least a quarter. I right now I'm actually booking in February for a lot of new projects, and I break my work down a little bit into only filling about 80% of my absolute capacity in a given week. And that's for multiple reasons. One, so that I have the ability to fit in a project when it comes along, if it is something that's really delightful, and I do that more often than not. But it also means that if I wind up with the flu, I can shove things around. And I really, really hate having to go to a client and say I'm not going to make our delivery goal. I would much rather be able to make it with a little extra scrambling on my end and be able to deliver.
I mean, you mentioned having the flu. I think of myself or Eric. If one of us got the flu, we might be sick for a couple of days and then we come back to work. I mean, you've got a voice you've got to worry about. If your voice changes with a cold or a flu and you're halfway through a book, what do you do?
To me, you need to talk with your clients. You need to set expectations that are realistic, and you need to properly wait. You can only rush a voice so much. And particularly if you have something like laryngitis or bronchitis, you've sprained a muscle. You cannot heal a muscle any faster than it's going to heal, no matter how much you want it to. And it doesn't matter what you drink or what you gargle or what you breathe. It takes rest. So it's very much an enormous amount of caretaking, preparation, and if you need to take the time. And that's hard. And sometimes you will leave people in a bind on that one. But if you do that, I think that is the responsible way to behave as a professional. And I think that your clients understand that and respond better than you delivering something that is obviously you kind of getting in there and trying to do the voices because it's no problem. I sound the same as I did yesterday.
Exactly.
No, you don't.
Yeah.
No, you don't.
Yeah, and absolutely from my viewpoint too. If we're doing our job right, built in a little bit of a buffer too for on-scene circumstances. So I would much rather wait a few days past the original deadline to not have a narrator sound like a completely different person.
Yes. So Eric, how often do you get projects where you know up front that it's going to be 12 books and all 12 books haven't been written yet? You can't even look at a script.
That comes to mind one. And that would be this one, right? No, usually I don't. We know if it's the first in a series, but we don't know. Are they going to do 2 a year? Are they going to do 1 a year? Are they going to do 1 a month? It's usually sort of unknown.
So how did that complicate the process? I want to hear the answer from both of you. How did that complicate the process for you in terms of selecting the talent and scheduling everything? Because we've got a fairly rigid schedule. Every 6 weeks, there's a new book coming out in the Opus X series. That had to be a little daunting.
Well, I guess for me, the hard part is over, right? Kind of finding Greg, and that was really the hard part. From here, it's just kind of getting things through, as making sure that we have scripts in time, that prep can be done properly, and getting the word counts to determine how long it's going to be, getting editors and proofers and everything lined up, and that's kind of the easy part of it. So I would say it doesn't. In a way, I appreciate series. When a book comes across my my desk and I see it's book 5 in a series, and we did the other 5 with this specific narrator who's had great reviews. I'm fairly certain, unless the author did something crazy for the fifth book, that we're going to go right back to that same narrator. So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Makes
and
sense.
you have an understanding worked in. It's, of course, it's delightful as a talent to come back to a property that you've already been working in. It's a little like visiting some old friends again. It's actually this is probably going to be the series with the most bam 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 that I think I've ever worked on. Most of the series that I tend to work on, and I vastly work on series, are anywhere from 6 to 18 months between books sometimes. And 18 is always interesting. And I generally at that point, I download and listen to the book again, because I'm like, okay, I keep, I keep voice files for books so that I can go back and refer to character voices. But at a certain point, that only does so much, and you don't remember the characters viscerally as well anymore. Getting this series was definitely looking at an email from Erick and going, okay, well, let's look at that calendar. I was maybe a year or so ago, I was on a podcast, and the host said, now, if I'm right, you did 53 audiobooks last year? It's like, yeah. I said, how? I said, Google Calendar. I credit that largely with how I manage that. Everything is very tightly scheduled in Google Calendar, including breathing room. So, I know exactly what I've got and how much I can cheat it, and when there is no further bending before the straw breaks.
Okay, and you mentioned breathing room. I'm just going to take the second half of that, room. People can see if you're watching the video portion of this, and if you're not, you can check it out. Greg is in a studio in his house, and this is a change in the audiobook industry over the course of the last several years, where talent are building studios in their own homes that are sound muffling. You see all the material that he's got on the walls, so there's no echo. The sound from his end is nearly perfect, that you can hear, and you can hear the difference between him speaking and Erick and I speaking. So what was the process for you putting that together, and when did you do it?
Sure. It was about 5 years ago. Yeah. I got started doing this in 2013, and shortly after I got started, I knew that I needed a real space. And of course, the technology changes make perfect sense for particularly the mid-sized production houses like Dreamscape, like Blackstone and Dion, because there's no inherent advantage to insisting that all of your voice actings come to your central place and do it from there. If you still have to pay your engineers, you still have to work through it all. So if you have narrators who can self-direct successfully, who have the ability to produce sound that meets your technical specs, and who can interact remotely, then that makes the most financial sense. You get to knock out a little bit of, well, we keep this 700 square feet for 3 little studios, and you don't have to do that as much. So it makes perfect sense to me that this is a thing that is the way that this works now. And of course, the technology changed a lot. We've got much better broadband capability. That's, I have a 1,100 asynchronous connection at the house, so that I can actually upload things and not wait a gazillion hours for them. But I am relatively handy anyway. This was a small room, large closet in my house, which I tore all the way down to the studs and built up with decoupled drywall layers and mass-loaded vinyl and sound insulation, and then acoustic panels, and then acoustic foam and bass traps, and all of the things that allow it to be a, for spoken word. I don't think there's such a thing as too dead a space for spoken word. And certainly that's not the case with musical recording. But if you're going to just record a voice, it really should go this far and die. We don't need, you can put echo in if you want it for something, but it's hard to take it back out. So that's where it is. So I've been doing, what am I at, 270 some odd books, I think, from here now.
All in that room.
All in this little room.
So what's a typical day for you? How much time in a given day do you spend in that little room?
Yeah, I've discovered that my optimal performance comes if I record in 2-hour blocks. and take a rather profound break between the blocks. So I get up, I come to work at around 8. I usually do some administrative stuff until 9 or 9:30, and then I try to work 9:30 to 11:30, 12:30 to 2:30, and 3:30 to 5:30. And during those 2 midday breaks, I get the heck out of the booth, I stretch, I do other things. And on that schedule, I've discovered that my production rate is usually about 2 to 1.5. So I usually do an hour and 15 to an hour and 25 minutes of finished audio per 2-hour block. And that gets me 3.5 to 4 hours of finished audio a day without any real difficulty. And if I need to push it, I can turn that up a little bit, and I can hit 4.5 in a day of finished hours of audio, and that is pretty much where
That's a lot.
it's too much. I can only do that for a couple of days before you can only prep a muscle to do so much work. You can't run marathons every day.
Mm-hmm.
So I run cross country every day, but not a marathon.
And so then you send the files to Eric when the book is finished, or are you sending them as you go along?
It depends on the project. For the most part, I usually send them as one fell swoop when they're all done. If we're working on really tight deadlines, if it's something that came and it's due like now, then I'll usually do a daily upload or dump them to somewhere where we can all get to the files, and then I ship them out. And I tag them as raw files when I render them out of my audio workstation so that they're easily identifiable.
Okay, and Eric, you have been an engineer for most of your professional life. So what happens on your end when you get these files?
So, yeah, the first step, when they come in, we'll assign them to an editor who's also proofing. They're following along with the book. They start at the beginning, fix all the pauses, any awkward breaths or, mouth noise and clicks are being taken care of. And as they're going along, they're generating a pickup list, which are items that need to be re-recorded.
So what would cause that?
I say something that's not on the page.
Yeah, basically. Misreads, mispronunciations are a big deal. And in some books that's more of an issue than others, but our editors are checking for all that. And we strive for 100% to what is written in that book.
What do you do in a situation where there's an obvious error in the book?
Oh, in the book, like a typo?
Yeah.
If it's something that is pretty obvious, we will just make the correction. Often the narrator is the one who's catching this.
Okay, Greg's nodding. I don't know if you could see him there.
Yeah, you probably can't, but I tend to, whenever I'm recording for anybody, I keep an Excel spreadsheet that has a selection of notes about the text and then a selection of my pronunciation research, so that if I had to look up something like Congulad Woolwich in Welsh, I can link the proof or editor to where I found that, so that they can at least look at it and go, okay, yeah. And legitimately, a couple of times I've linked them to something and they've said, well, that's great. If you'd said what you said that you were supposed to say, that would have been even better. And I went, oh, darn it. But yeah, I don't think I've ever seen a book where the text made it to release without a single typo in it. I mean, it's so
kind
phenomenal.
of surprising, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's, but
Yeah.
it doesn't matter how many times and how many people you parse through it, things will get missed. So, I keep a note if I find a typo. I know where it was, what it was, and how I chose to handle it, and then let the editors deal with that. And if they disagree, if they come back and say, no, I think that was supposed to be there for stylistic purposes, then it's a pickup. We'll fix it. We'll record it again and they can put it back.
So Eric, what's the typical time frame between when you get the final audio from Greg, and so you've got the proofing process, and then there's the pickups, et cetera, et cetera. How long does it take to go from the initial files to the final files?
So we count on 2 weeks, and that's what most editors like. it's not that they jump right on it necessarily all the time, but that kind of 2 weeks is a comfortable amount of time for them to get it edited, and then another round of, proofing. We've pushed it, again, there's sort of a buffer built in there. 2 weeks is more than is needed on most titles, especially if you have a narrator like Greg, who's done a lot of the homework and is showing you the homework, and you can follow, you're not looking up all these pronunciations on your own. That's definitely speeds up the process. So there are times when we've had to, again, kind of call in that favor and go, hey, you think you can turn this around in 5 days if we really need to, and we'll get the narrator lined up and they're ready to go when the pickups are in. They get their portion re-recorded, and we snap them back in, and so we can move faster. But we like to do 2 weeks is pretty standard for us to get that all completed.
Okay, and now we have some finished audio from Obsidian Detective that we're going to play now. And for those of you scoring at home, this is actually the beginning of chapter 15, I believe, and it's one of the early meetings, maybe the earliest meeting between Erick, the character in the book, and Gia. So let's roll that right now.
Who are you? Gia demanded. You're not with my enforcement zone. I don't recognize you. That's because I just started working tonight. Detective Erick Blackwell, Enforcement Zone 122. The gray-haired cop strolled over to the flitter. He opened the door and John fell out with a groan. The cop knelt and pulled out a bright white strip from a pocket, a binding tie. He set his rifle down and shoved John's wrists together before slapping the tie down. It grew in an instant and wrapped around the drunk's wrists. Gia let out a strangled laugh. You're in my enforcement zone? Yes. Like I said, I just started. Erick tapped his PNIU. This is Detective Erick Blackwell requesting an ambulance for... He glanced at the downed Cyrus. 2 suspects with minor injuries. Send along a patrol car, too. The primary situation's been handled, but there's some cleanup for them to do. He looked back at her with a slight grin. You're lucky I showed up when I did. Listen, Detective Blackwell, Gia began. I don't know what or where you transferred from, but what you did was totally unacceptable. Erick shook his head. Local department regulations clearly state that all officers are allowed to discharge weapons up to and including lethal discharge in defense of any imminent threats to the lives of themselves, other officers, or citizens. I'd say getting plowed into by a drunk definitely counts as an imminent threat. He grabbed his rifle and stared down at the unconscious John before moving over to Cyrus and slapping on a binding tie on the downed man. She pointed around them. You could have killed someone, Gia suggested. Could have? Sure. But I didn't, now did I? Erick walked back toward her. Trust me, I wasn't using armor-piercing bullets. I knew if I hit the emitters or the main vehicle body, the bullets wouldn't go anywhere else. I've taken down a vehicle or 50 in my time. Gia scoffed. You hit those things because you got lucky. Lucky? Erick shook his head and patted his gun. You know what this is? Gia shrugged. Overkill? A symbol of your enormous ego? A desire to produce something you believe flatters you? Her eyes glanced down, an unflattering smile on her face as she eyed him back. Should I go on? Erick snickered. I like that, but no. It's a TR-7 quad. 4 selectable barrels. He stroked the weapon like a pet. If I wanted to kill someone, I would flip this to 4-barrel mode and open up, draining the mags in seconds. The bullets would have shredded that car like it was a leaf in a tornado. He nodded at the vehicle. Or I could have just fired several times into the driver. Instead, I took out the emitters and engine to ground the vehicle. He grunted. Not even the fool who was trying to kill you will die. No, trust me. I'm a big believer in luck, but this time Lady Luck was nowhere around. He patted his chest. This was all me. Gia tucked her stun pistol back into her purse.
So, Greg, do you remember that scene at all?
Yeah. That's that initial squaring off, and you can almost see them both fluffing their feathers and kind of doing there's threat display going on. There's a little like, who are you? Who are you? Who are you? It's classic in a lot of ways too. Actually, it reminded me a little bit of some almost Indiana Jones and 007 kind of moments where the two competent operators meet each other in the field, and there's a little bit of both of them thinking that they're obviously the most competent of the people on scene. And, yeah.
So, Greg, when you first read the material, you get a lot of things, and you have, for people that aren't familiar with your work, you have a great range, everywhere from hardcore science fiction to Disney bedtime stories.
That is true. Yeah.
There's a great range there.
Yeah.
So you get material, and as a part of the prepping the material, you go through and you read it all. So what were your initial thoughts when you read Obsidian Detective?
I'm trying to remember what I described it to one of my partners as like, it was sort of Blade Runner meets Dashiell Hammett. There's this sort of delightful PI feeling, but it's also the cop procedural, but it's obviously that same almost Baroque sci-fi feel. It reminds me a little bit of the set dressing that David Lynch does with some of his, it reminds me of the Dune adaptation, that opulence, that really decadent and decadent feeling society aspects. So it was it was obvious that it was a cop buddy sci-fi tension of on a number of levels. There was an age gap tension, there was a society class level tension, there was a gender tension, there was an experience so there were all these different strands that were pulling and stretching each other, and it was going to be I could tell there were going to be some really great dialogue, especially interactions between people. So, which was absolutely true, and I love there's great characters in there that that you'll sort of recognize the archetypes from great cop shows and great, the long suffering detective or captain and the other detectives and the way that it kind of plays out. So it was neat. I really like seeing genres blend, and this is one of those. It's sci-fi, but it's a procedural, and it's a mystery, and it's a thriller, and it's a little bit of a tension story. There's a little of the sexual tension, like Mulder and Scully's action going on, and but it's
so you had committed to 12 books without actually seeing anything. Now, were you the least bit apprehensive about that?
Well, I'm going to say up front that I actually knew that I was committing to 6.
Aha. Okay.
No, I mean I've done so many books, and I've done so many series that at a certain point I'm like, well, okay. It's just going to keep going, and that's cool.
Some have to be more fun though than others.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there's certainly things that I click with, more or less as a reader. Although I always have a really easy time connecting with characters as an actor. And I think that's an acting thing. When you have empathy for characters, you click right in without too much difficulty. But there is something nice about doing a series where you're following a central set of characters. The ones that can get a little bit tricky are the linked non-contiguous series, where you've got it's extremely common in romance world, where you've got 2 characters in this book, and then their friend Tim is going to meet his partner in book 2, and then they'll be the main characters, but these 2 characters are still there. And then that the mailman is going to meet his partner, and then, and it keeps going and going and going. And so 18 books later, you now have the couples from all 18 books, and they walk through each other's lives like it's an episode of Friends. So at a certain point, keeping voices fresh and unique and straight gets extremely difficult. But of course, sci-fi has its own challenges, and I will. There was a delightful sci-fi for one of my authors that has a race of reptiloid aliens that are in it, and they had a very small part in book 2,
And so I really went with it and gave them this fascinating voice that would be really crunchy, and that was great until they were the main characters of book 5.
Oh my gosh.
And, well, that came back to bite you, didn't it, Greg? But anyway.
So yeah, you couldn't do 4.5 hours of finished audio with that voice.
It was a little harder. Thankfully, it wasn't in point of view narrative. It was just, yeah, they weren't the main characters, but they had a lot more lines.
Yeah, it'd be really tough reading the narrative portion of the book in that.
Yeah, that would turn people off, I think. You couldn't listen to that much of it. But
now, one of the things that's exciting for us at LMBPN and for a lot of our fans is the idea that the book and the audiobook are being released simultaneously. That has not been our history. So that's a really cool thing, but the pace in which we're writing these books is rapid. We talked about that a little bit before. So I'm curious, Erick, where you guys are at now with Obsidian Detective and the second book, Shattered Truth. I think I just got you the script for that maybe earlier in the week or late last week. I can't remember.
Yeah. So really that's, back to where we do our word count and then pass it off to Greg to do the hard work there. So I hope I remembered to send that to you, Greg.
You did. You absolutely did. And I mean, they're all, the at least the first 6 are all in my Google Calendar planning. So they're all lined up. I've got them all, broken out by the estimate of their lengths. And then as we get the actual word count on the script, then I can fine tune the length estimate. But I know we did all the corrections for Obsidian Detective. That's back with Dreamscape, so it should be going through its final cleanup and double checks. And Shattered Truth, I've got the script for that, and I am away at a convention next week, so I'll be recording it, cracking on as soon as I get back. And so that's due back to Dreamscape by later in the month, and then we just keep on keeping on. So.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, this is very exciting for us. It's a pleasure to be working with both of you guys on this project, and it's always a pleasure to work with talented, responsible people, and you guys are exactly that. Any final words on the series, Erick? Just your plans for the series and anything going out?
Boy, I'm very excited for it. We in the past had not done a lot of science fiction, and then now we're doing all these great books by you, and I feel like it's a chance to kind of have some fun. I've had a chance of working with other narrators that I haven't had a whole lot of a lot of chances to do that with. I think, Greg, this might even be just your second or third book.
I think it's third, yeah.
Third and a half.
Third, yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Something like that. But it was always a pleasure.
Yeah. We did have like a little tiny one that we threw in there somewhere, but.
Yeah, or a piece or a portion out of one, but
one third of it, yeah.
But I love working with you because you are so thorough. You take your job very seriously. You're caring about these books. You're not. There are, I hate to say it, some narrators that are still great, but they are obviously kind of sit down, read the book, and then they go, okay, now you guys deal with it. So I love working with them. So when I'm, initially, like what Greg said, 6 books, I'm like, ooh, I want to make sure it's, we're working with people that are easy to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exciting for me, because then I'm doing less chasing around and where's this, where's that. We're not worrying so much about a bazillion, fixes, and we can just focus on cool things like, we've been spending some time picking some really cool music to kind of go on the intros and outros of these.
Cool.
That is fun.
Excited.
I always like that.
Yeah. Have you selected the music yet?
We did. Yeah, we've got some music for the series.
That's going to be fun.
Like I said,
Nice.
The first one's pretty much all wrapped up now. I think it's probably being duplicated as we speak. So,
another cool thing for LMBPN listeners, fans of LMBPN books who listen to them as audio, these will be the first books that have ever been available on as actual audiobooks, where CDs that you can put in your car and things like that. Always before, it's just been digital downloads for us.
Yeah, it's neat collectibles. There are certain audiobook consumers that just, they like how some people want that book in their hands to read.
Mm-hmm.
Some people really do collect and like the CD or the MP3 CD collections.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's always nice to see them in your library too. I always enjoy seeing stuff that I worked on in my library. I'm like, oh, look, it's that one.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to do this. I really appreciate it. It's I don't know. It's great that you're willing to help us promote this series. This is such an important series for us, and we're just pleased as could be to be partnering with you guys for this series.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys, for being here.
All right. Thanks, Stephen.